able to minister music this morning. She doesn't normally travel with me. Y'all been spoiled having her twice now. Sorry. The worst thing preachers do, drive the sound people crazy. From the beginning, no. He said, you know, you have a way, he was in my Sunday school class where I taught at the time. He said, you have a way of explaining Christian principles and ideas without using all the Christian lingo we tend to use. And I said, well, I do try to do that when I'm teaching. You know, we all fall into, you know, lingo and expressions and acronyms. I was teasing Brother Mike. He used an acronym yesterday, and I had to look at my wife and say, do you know what that acronym is? Because, you know, cops use acronyms. You know, they're always cops, military. It's always acronyms, you know. And so I try not to do that, you know, not just assume people know. But anyway, he said, you should pray about it. Okay, I can pray about it, you know. And he was just like, in fact, he said, I would recommend that you talk to 10 people kind of in that world. You know, he knew I went to, you know, with the previous ministry, I would go to Washington and, you know, lobby to protect, you know, those ministries. It was a Christian school ministry. And he said, don't you know maybe 10 people you could ask? And I was like, well, sure, yeah. So I began to pray about it, and I began to talk to people about it. And I ended up, I think, talking to about 20 people about it. And it became evident to my wife and me that God was, in fact, leading in that. I didn't even know the name of the ministry, what it would be at the time. And by about August of 2009, we both felt convinced. Our daughters were teenagers. We included them in this prayer of decision. They were going, I think, into their junior and senior year of high school at a Christian school, maybe 10th, 11th grade, don't remember. But, you know, we just finally decided that, yeah, this is how God is leading us. And I said to my wife, I think what I need to do is go to the leadership of the ministry I was with and let them know this is what God's leading us to do. But we'd like a year still working for you and lay the foundation for this new ministry, create the infrastructure, raise support, whatever, and work full-time for you for another 12 months. And she said, what if they don't agree to that? I'm like, well, we'll just have to trust the Lord. And I went to them, and that's what I laid out, and they said, yeah, that'll be fine. So August of 2010, 12 months later, we took the step of faith to do this ministry full-time. And I got to tell you, on August 1st of 2010, although I had been spending a year talking to pastors and doing meetings in churches, had several pastors say, if you do this, Paul, we'll support you. Not one had sent a check yet. So the first week full-time in ministry, I'm like, hey, preacher, didn't you say that you were going to start? Oh, yeah. We'll start sending that support check. The first one from the first church was $25 a month. Now, that was a church that probably didn't have 25 adults in their Sunday morning service, but that was the first check. Now, I'm happy to report to you that as of last Sunday, we have 74 churches here in Georgia that are financed. Yes, you can, that's, give the Lord a hand. Yeah. I mean, really, if you think about it, that's really of the Lord. I mean, missionaries will run all over the country trying to get 40, 50, maybe 60 churches to support their ministry. Right here in Georgia, we have that many churches, independent Baptist churches, that support our ministry. One of those might be a Southern Baptist church, but you know what? Their check clears too, so. This is my wife's leg. Yeah. So anyway, we thank the Lord for that. Of course, individuals support us, and too, they see the value of it, and we're just thankful for that. We really do encourage you to get our prayer card, pray for us. Corey Lawrence helps me part-time, and we'd love to be able to get him full-time in the ministry and be a part of that. We've been meeting with Florida pastors about maybe expanding into Florida and having a chapter of Citizen Impact there. We're just trying to trust the Lord to lead us in that. We don't want to get ahead of the Lord, but there's lots of things to pray about. Well, as your pastor and I talked about what to do today, kind of a Faith and Freedom Sunday, God and Country Sunday, whatever you might prefer to call it. It's a time where we're not worshiping America, right? We're not worshiping America. We're still worshiping God. We're still worshiping Jesus. We're not suggesting necessarily that, look at America in the Bible. See, it talks about the eagle here, and let's be careful about all that, and calling America the new Israel or things like that. We're going to be careful about that. But there's no question that we live in a country that God has been an integral part of this country since the beginning. Did you notice that in the songs that we sang? The patriotic songs. Sometimes you got to get to the third and fourth verse, right? Before they start talking about God. But they talk about the God's hand in America. And Pastor mentioned that when I was first here, I did a presentation on how, our founding fathers and our early presidents, our documents, even our national monuments, consistently refer to God and the Bible and faith. And he said, would you do something like that again? And I was like, okay, it's not a preaching message per se, but we'll be glad to do that. And then at the end, I'll wrap up with just a brief challenge from the Word. So it's a little different. I just want to kind of preface, it's a little different than we would normally have on a Sunday morning, but your pastor and I agreed that it'd probably be worth the time to do that. Now, let me say this, and by the way, I don't know if you need to darken any lights or anything to see this, but let me say this. The purpose of this isn't to suggest that all of our founding fathers, or at least the ones I mentioned, were all Bible-believing, Baptists like you and me. They weren't necessarily. Now, for some of them, they didn't believe in the Trinity, right? So people say, oh, well, then they were deists or they were this. Well, not necessarily. They respected God in the Bible. They may not have had their doctrines just like we believe today, but they weren't the kind of secularists that we're led to believe today. And we're taught today separation of church and state, as if there can be no reference to God in the Bible in any kind of government, committee or proceedings or whatever. And I think this presentation will show you that's not what our founding fathers had in mind at all, okay, when our country was founded. So, again, I'm not trying to suggest that everyone I mention here believes like you and me, or that this is only those people in America who were godly Christians. There are plenty of others in our country's history that were godly Christians that we're not going to mention. All right, there's all Paul's disclaimers and provisos and all that, okay? It was the Lord who put it in my mind. I could feel it hand upon me, the fact that it would be possible to sail from here to the Indies. All who heard my project rejected it with laughter, ridiculing me. There is no question that the inspiration was from the Holy Scriptures. The fact that the gospel must still be preached to so many lands in such a short time, this is what convinces me. Now, if you've heard a missionary presentation, this probably sounds similar, right? To a missionary. This is why God is sending us to Thailand, to Brazil, to England, or wherever, because of the need to share the gospel there. But this was not written by a missionary. This was written in Christopher Columbus's diary about how God led him to the New World. Now, I've had people say, well, Christopher Columbus had a profit motive. Well, maybe he did. I'm not against capitalism. Certainly opened up trade lanes and things like that. But what he wrote in his diary was it was the Lord who brought him here, and the need for the gospel to be here is what drove him here. And let's be honest, we have the gospel here today because of Christopher Columbus, right? All right, you're familiar with this quote, probably. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their, what's the next word? With certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In our Declaration of Independence, our founding fathers said, our rights come from God. This was a huge change from any other government that was established that always said, we, the government, give you these rights. No, our founding fathers said, we don't give them to you. God gives them to you. And then the next paragraph they said, but governments are instituted among men for what? Well, to protect these rights. But these rights don't come from government. In fact, the more we move to a secularized America with no God in our government, the more we move in a direction where we're saying to the government, you give us our rights. And then what do we then empower them to do? Right. God governs. There's 3 slides. Note the Bible references in all 3 slides. Same quote. God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured in the sacred writings that except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this. I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. The person who said this knew their Bible, didn't they? Now, this is just a short excerpt from a longer speech given by Benjamin Franklin at the Constitutional Convention. That the representatives from the different states were arguing, debating, and getting nowhere. Finally, the elder statesman, who I think was, if not 80, pushing 80 at the time, stood up and gave this impassioned speech. I just quote a portion of it, where he concluded the speech by suggesting that they stop, take time to pray, and seek God's help in fleshing out the Constitution. Did someone say, oh no, Benjamin, separation of church and state? No. They stopped. They took, I think, 3 days to pray and ask for God's help, came back and fleshed out the Constitution that we have today. For my own part, I sincerely esteem it, referring to the Constitution, a system which, without the finger of God, never could have been suggested and agreed upon by such a diversity of interest. Alexander Hamilton, part of the Constitutional Convention, in referencing the situation I just described, so many different interests, so many different points of view, said we could never have gotten the Constitution we have today without the finger of God. This next man proposed to divide the central government into 3 branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch. Now, when I do this, I often like to ask the young people a question, but invariably, there's some older dude who wants to raise his hand and shout out the answer. So just, you older guys, hold on just for a minute. Let me try to get the students to answer this, okay? The executive branch of our federal government is what? One of you students tell me. Yes, ma'am. President and vice president. But yes, president. The legislative branch is what? Come on, you know. Come on. Don't let the older guys show you up. All right. Oh, no, that's just the same. See, this is why the Chinese are beating us. See, they don't tell their kids the answers. All right, somebody tell me, what's the legislative branch? Oh, nobody knows. Congress, right. And it's a bicameral system, which means what? What? We have the Senate and the House of Representatives. Very good. You get the brownie points today. And then the legislative branch, of course, is the courts. Judicial. What did I say? Yes. Don't misspeak when you're standing in front of a group of people. They all yell at you what you said wrong. He found this from Isaiah 33:22, which says, the Lord is our judge. There's the judicial branch. Make sure I don't say it wrong again. The Lord is our lawgiver, where the laws come from. And the Lord is our king, the executive branch. He will say, now we know our president is not a king. Why? Because we have this balances of systems here to keep him from becoming a dictator and a king and not forgiving $40 billion in oops, I shouldn't have said that. But that came from the Bible. And James Madison, father of our Constitution, knew his Bible and proposed that form of central government. The general principles on which the fathers, referring to the founding fathers, achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. Now, before I tell you who said this, does this sound like the person who said this is saying, in order to be an American, you must be a Christian? No. He's saying that the general principles are from Christianity. Now, anybody can be an American, and we have freedom of religion, that you can believe what you want or not believe anything. But the general principles come from Christianity. He went on to write in his letter to Thomas Jefferson, I will avow that I then believed and now believe that these general principles of Christianity are as eternal and immutable as the existence and attributes of God. John Adams, our second president, put that in a letter to Thomas Jefferson. By the way, after they were both no longer president. It was later in their lives. There we go. I hold the precepts of Jesus as delivered by himself to be the most pure, benevolent, and sublime which ever have been preached to man. Thomas Jefferson, our third president, appreciated the teachings and preachings of Jesus. He had some interesting ideas about Jesus in the Bible, but he did say that he appreciated those. The future of success of America is not in this Constitution, but in the laws of God upon which this Constitution was founded. I must have snuck in a quote from a preacher, right? This can't be from our founding father. The laws of God? No. Separation of church and state. Actually, no. James Madison, fourth president, father of the Constitution, said our Constitution was founded on the laws of God. For these blessings we owe to Almighty God, and for whom we derive them, and with profound reverence, our most grateful and unceasing acknowledgement. Fifth president gave God the glory, God the credit. Referring to the Bible, this man said that book is the rock upon which our republic rests. Seventh President Andrew Jackson. You know, can you imagine one of these presidential debates with, 12 candidates standing up on the stage and Anderson Cooper moderating, and one of them say, the Bible is the rock upon which our republic rests. Anderson Cooper's white hair would all fall out, I think. What? This quote's a little bit longer, so bear with me. We have been recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We have preserved these many years in peace and prosperity. We have grown in numbers, wealth, and power as no other nation has ever grown. But we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. We have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own, intoxicated with unbroken success. We have become too self-sufficient to feel necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. Boy, that is a message for Sunday morning church in America in 2023, isn't it? But that's not when it was written. It was written by Abraham Lincoln, I think in 60. Yeah, you knew that one? Yeah, somebody knew that one. He was proclaiming a national day of prayer and fasting, calling on Americans to beg God's forgiveness for thinking that we're the reason that America is so successful, rather than giving God the glory for why America is so successful. Fundamental basis of these nations' laws were given to Moses on the Mount. What's that reference to? Ten Commandments. Fundamental basis of our Bill of Rights comes from the teachings we get from Exodus, St. Matthew, from Isaiah, and St. Paul. I don't think we emphasize that enough these days. If we don't have a proper fundamental moral background, we will finally end up with a totalitarian government which does not believe in rights from anybody except the state. Harry Truman said, as we move in a more secular direction, as we continue to remove the idea that our laws are founded on the laws of God, then what we create for ourselves is what I said a minute ago from an earlier quote. We create for ourselves a totalitarian government where the government says, we give you the rights that you have and we'll take them away whenever we see fit. That's what we get with a secular government. The rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. Does it surprise you that John Kennedy said that? This next quote I think is my favorite. The wall of separation between church and state is a metaphor. What does that mean? Somebody tell me. Why is the wall of separation, church and state, a metaphor? because it's not a real wall, right? It's just a metaphor. It's just a reference to a wall, right? It's a comparison, right? Your English teacher will have a word with you afterwards. No, I'm teasing. A metaphor, listen to this quote, a metaphor which has proved useless as a guide to judging, it should be frankly and explicitly abandoned. Abandoned as a guide to judging. Is that the way judges view that today? No, it's a cornerstone of American jurisprudence, right? Separation of church and state. But he said, no, it should never be used. Well, who would say that? Only the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And why did he say that? What's the bad history about the wall of separation of church and state? Does anybody know what he means by that?
The idea that just government should deal with nothing with the church, or should deal with nothing with the government?
I think the bad history he means is we think that term is in the Constitution and it's not. What is it in? Well, it's in a very important letter. You see, the Danbury Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut wrote to Thomas Jefferson and said, under this new system that you've given us, you've promised freedom of religion, but now you're president, and what does that mean for us as Baptists? Do we still have the rights as citizens as Baptists? Now that sounds crazy to us today. Why wouldn't they? Well, because under the previous system, if you weren't a member of the Church of England, guess what? You didn't own property, you couldn't vote. You had to, just like in England, here in America, if you weren't part of the right church, you didn't have rights as a citizen. Madison saw that, Jefferson saw that and said, that's crazy. You can be a member of whatever church you want or no church. You still have rights as America. And in response to their letter, he used the expression, a wall of separation between church and state. Right? Not saying that God or God's people can't climb over that wall in the government, but that the government is not going to tell you how to worship. Right? And we've, of course, turned that on its head today. Let's look at some of our national monuments. Did you know there's a Bible verse inscribed on the Liberty Bell? Proclaim liberty throughout all the lands and to all the inhabitants thereof. Any of y'all been up to Philadelphia and seen the Liberty Bell in person? Yeah? It's not all it's cracked up to be, is it? I promise you, my wife's saying, don't tell that joke, don't tell that joke, don't tell that joke. So I'm from Philadelphia originally. I was born in Philadelphia. I know, I sound like I'm from the South, right? No. I'm sanctified by my wife, who's from South Carolina. But when we were dating, I took her to Philadelphia, and we saw the Liberty Bell, and I took her on one of those carriage tours, the horse-drawn carriage. And the guy said to me, you guys seen the Liberty Bell? And I was like, yeah. He says, not all it's cracked up to be. So I heard that 36 years ago, and I'm still using that joke. I called him a ding-a-ling, and he thought that was hilarious, too. But, am I lying? He did. It's a true story. In the Washington Monument, the cornerstone contains a Bible. Also in the Washington Monument, there's a memorial plaque from the Free Press Methodist Episcopal Church. On the 20th landing of the stairway is a prayer offered by, or the 12th landing, a prayer offered by the city of Baltimore. On the 20th floor is a memorial plaque presented by Chinese Christians. On the 24th floor is a presentation made by Sunday school children from New York and Philadelphia, quoting those Bible verses. And on the top, there are the words in Latin, praise be to God, Laus Deo. In the United States Capitol, you cannot miss the religious imagery. You walk into the rotunda. All of you have seen the rotunda, the dome from the outside. Anyone been inside the rotunda? This is not a joke, but okay. So there's these big paintings, right? And they're there. I've tried to take pictures of them, but they've never, when I've been there, but I don't know if this will work, but these paintings right here, they're all around there. They're big. I tried to take pictures, but I've never taken a picture that it's turned out well enough to use in this presentation. But one is the embarkation of the Pilgrims. It depicts William Brewster holding a Bible right there, John Robinson leading the group in prayer, and they're leaving Holland to come to the New World. Now, they were English people. Why were they in Holland? Yeah, they had to flee England because they weren't part of the Church of England, right? So they had religious persecution. In Holland, there is a plaque. I haven't seen it in person, but I've seen pictures, where the Pilgrims are acknowledged for their progressiveness, right? We think of them, these Puritans, as being, this hardcore, strict Christian sect, but from Holland, and in that day, they recognized that they were actually quite progressive in leaving the Church of England. Anyway, that acknowledges in our U.S. Capitol that up in the dome of the Capitol, on the inside, painted on the inside, is this painting Washington ascending up into heaven there. He's right there surrounded by 13 maidens, symbolizing the first original 13 states. And it's a very religious painting of him ascending up into heaven. There's another painting called Religion, just honors the role of God. And then there's this painting, the baptism of Pocahontas there, one of the first converts in the Virginia colony, right there in the rotunda of our nation's capital. Speaking of the Virginia colony, the Virginia Charter says that they came to propagate, quote, the Christian religion to such people as yet live in darkness and miserable ignorance of the true knowledge and worship of God. That's what Virginia was chartered on. Jefferson's memorial, you'll find his words inscribed, God who gave us life gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secured when we've removed the conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? And that's a rhetorical question, I suppose, but what's the answer? No, we cannot be secure in these liberties if we do not acknowledge that these liberties come from God. Union Station, you'll find Bible verses there on the facade engraved, thou hast put all things under his feet, and the truth shall make you free. Lincoln's Memorial, you'll find his words from the Gettysburg Address, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. You'll also see his second inaugural address, where he mentions God some 14 times, given in March of 1865. The presidential inauguration is January now, but back then it was March. March of 1865. What was kind of going on about that time in our country? Yeah. So he's addressing, it'll end the next month, right? Lee will surrender the next month, and a few days later, Lincoln will be assassinated, right? Shot on the 14th, but he died on the 15th of April, an ominous day even today, April 15th. I also think that was the same date the Titanic sank. Yeah. Different year, but yeah. I'm tempted to say something about the Titanic, but I'm not going to. He mentions God some 14 times in his second inaugural address, and this is just an excerpt from that. Again, two sides of the Civil War he's speaking to here. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any man should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge not that we be not judged. That of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes, and then he quotes the Bible. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to the man by whom the offense cometh. With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we're in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle. Well, just a great speech. I encourage you to read the whole thing. If you're ever at the Lincoln Memorial, the Gettysburg Address is on one side, the second inaugural address is engraved on the other side, the inside, and just tremendous verse. And again, mentions God in the Bible. Library of Congress, you'll find in the Great Hall of the Jefferson Building, two Bibles, Gutenberg and the Gam-Copy Giant Bible of Mance. There's many biblical inscriptions found on the ceilings and walls of the Library of Congress. And there's quotes, statues from representing various fields of knowledge, and there's a statue of Moses, and there's a statue of Paul with the Bible verse, what doth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God. The Supreme Court, you cannot miss the biblical foundation of American law. We were talking this morning with the Wilkies about when we first met them, I was in seminary, finishing up my degree and working as a security guard. In order to do that, in order to be a security guard in South Carolina, I had to have 6 hours of training. That's what you do if you're not going to carry a gun. It's more if you're going to carry a gun. But I wasn't going to carry a gun, so I had 6 hours of training. The very first words out of the mouth of that official trainer in South Carolina was, our laws are based on the Ten Commandments. It's because they are. At the Supreme Court, there's evidences that. Here's on the outside east pediment, a marble relief of Moses holding tablets containing the Ten Commandments. The oak door going into the chamber are the Roman numerals 1 through 10, again, symbolizing the Ten Commandments. Over the heads of the justices, there's a carved marble relief, large stone tablet containing the Roman numerals 1 through 10. Someone told me that they did a tour of the Supreme Court, and the tour guide said that Roman numerals 1 through 10 was the Bill of Rights. Did they put the Bill of Rights on a stone tablet? No, it's the Ten Commandments. And then at the White House, there's an inscription by the first president to inhabit the White House, John Adams, obviously our second president, but the first one to be in the White House. It's cut into the marble facing of the state dining room fireplace, and it's this prayer. I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and on all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof. I don't know why I get a reaction from that every time I read that. And then the last monument I'll mention is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, or it's more referred to now as the Tomb of the Unknowns, that kind of encompass all the branches of the military. If you ever go to Washington, there's a lot of really cool things to see, but I would encourage you to go watch the changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It is one of the most moving and patriotic things you'll ever experience as an American. And engraved on that tomb, it says, "Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God." And really all throughout our nation's capital, it reveals that Christianity is the source of America's liberty and prosperity. And honestly, don't we all agree that America has seen prosperity like no other nation, that America is a symbol of liberty like no other nation that has ever existed? And it begs the question, why? I mean, why has God blessed America like he has? Well, I think we can come up with a few ideas. No other country has sent more missionaries sharing the gospel around the world than America has. Probably America's relationship with Israel is another good reason why God's blessing us. But wouldn't you agree that God has blessed America because of the things I've showed you here this morning? That we are founded on a nation that acknowledge God and the Bible and Christian principles. And if we're going to continue to see the blessings of God, we need to see that and acknowledge that and teach our kids and grandchildren that. And so the final quote I have here is from the U.S. House of Representatives in 1855, where they said the great vital element in our system is the belief of our people in the pure doctrines and the divine truths of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, I want to just have a quick closing challenge to you from 1 Peter chapter 2, but I do want to mention that before I forget, we do have some materials on the back table that's available, including this book, which many of the quotes and things I got from this presentation came from this book. You might find that helpful. I do have a DVD of this presentation if you're interested in that. It's just on a donation basis. Some other books back there. But I also want to say back there I have free handouts on some of the legislation we've talked about. The gambling and religious freedom legislation, as well as something I didn't mention that someone's already asked me about, the heartbeat bill. So I do have some information back there, and Tammy and I will be back there to help you with that and answer questions. But in 1 Peter, chapter number 2, I just want to read 2 verses and leave you with this thought and challenge. Verses 13 and 14. Say, "Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake." Ordinance, we might say that a different way. Law, regulations, right? Ordinance of who? Of man. For the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme or unto governors, verse 14, as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of them that do well. The Bible here gives us the twofold purpose of government. What is it? The punishment of evildoers, in other words, the safety of its people, its citizens, and the praise of them that do well, encouraging good behavior, rewarding good behavior. One of the things I think about when I think of that is how our government gives tax deductions for giving to charitable organizations, right? The more charitable organizations that exist, the less the government has to do for society, right? So it encourages those organizations and encourages good behavior. Now, we don't have a king, but we could say that it's the federal government and state and local government, right? So submit to yourselves, every ordinance of man, whether it be federal government or state and local government. Now, I'll be honest with you. That's not a popular message to share in today's political climate, because most people, certainly of the conservative or independent persuasion, are very anti-government, right? Fighting the government. And we don't have to listen to the government. And the problem is the government. But I have to be honest about what the Bible says. God has given us human government, and it's a gift to the church. It's a gift to God's people. We have the family, we have the church, and we have human government. Those three things exist for a purpose. Part of that purpose is structure, right? Well, why do we have a family? Well, because it gives structure. There's nothing wrong with being single and independent and on your own, but there's a real value in having family, having people around you, having a support system in place, right? Then we have the church. For years we've been hearing people say, I don't have to go to a building to worship God. Well, no, but God has given you the church. It's a structure, right? And I don't mean structure as in a building. I mean, it's a support system. It's a way to have interact with other people to fellowship with and to pray with and to help you and to worship together. Worship as a group and communally. And human government is given to us for structure. I mean, we think that we could exist and independently outside of government, and we'd all do fine. At least that's what our independent, or what's the word I'm looking for? You got conservative, Republican, and no, libertarian. Yeah, libertarian. We don't need government, right? Government's the problem, right? Well, we kind of do. I mean, without human government, what would our safety be like on our streets, right? What would our borders be like? I opened up for questions one time at a church when I did a legislative report, and one guy said, why are more people talking about Georgia seceding from the Union? And I was like, oh my goodness. Well, maybe because Georgia doesn't have a navy when the Chinese Navy shows up out here on the Atlantic coast, deciding they're going to attack Georgia. We benefit from the safety that government provides. Now, I bet most of you agree with me that government has gotten way too big and way too involved in our lives, right? But that doesn't mean that we do away with government, at least not according to the Bible. According to the Bible, God's given us human government, and it's for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of them that do well. So we could talk more, Romans 13 and other things, but I hope that's a help and a challenge to you this morning as we conclude this God and Country Day, and thoughts of appreciation for God and our country. And we would love to talk to you afterwards, tell you more about our ministry, but if nothing else, please get a prayer card and remember to pray for us, all right? I'm going to close in prayer and turn the service over to Pastor. Father, thank you for the privilege and opportunity to be here today, and thank you for this great church, Pastor Link. Thank you for our dear friends, the Wilkies, and they're serving here. Pray for camp coming up this week. Pray for safety as everyone travels up there. At a great week, a spiritual revival. I pray for anyone that's here in the service that although my message was not geared for those who are not born again, if there is someone here that's listening to this right now that is not sure that they're born again, Father, you'd speak to their hearts and prompt them to either let the pastor know or someone they know or me know that they're not 100% sure of that, so that they would not leave today without the assurance